Hello everyone and welcome to the continuation of Chapter 4. We're going to talk about the integumentary system here, starting with the epidermis, which is going to be the very top layer of skin. So the outermost layer is going to be the thinnest and flattest layer. These cells are all going to be dead out here, and we're not going to go through all the multiple layers of the epidermis, but all of it will be made up of epithelial tissue, and the specific epithelial tissue will be the stratified squamous epithelium. So these cells down in here have keratin within them, and as they start moving toward the top layer of our skin, they are going to start having organelles degrade down, they're going to lose their nucleus, and they'll still have that keratin within them, and that is what's going to assist in waterproofing our skin. We also have some other cells called Langerhans cells. You see this blue guy over here. These are also called dendritic cells, and they're a type of white blood cell that's going to help defend our body. The other type of cell we see in here is a melanocyte, and they're the gray guys down in here. They're going to produce a pigment called melanin, and that melanin pigment is going to be black or brown, and it secretes it through these extensions. So see how the little extensions are going between our other keratinocyte cells, and they are going to release melanin, and that helps to give the pigment of our skin. Or if we receive UV light from the sun, we're going to secrete this more, and that's how we get tan. And also some cells are going to help us convert cholesterol to vitamin D. Now if we go below the epidermis, so here's our epidermis here, below this area down in here, all of that is the dermis, this layer in here. If we're looking at a histology slide, all of this in here is the epidermis, and all of this light pink down in here is the dermis, both of these in here. Now the dermis is going to be much thicker. It's about 80% of our skin, and it's made up of dense fibrous connective tissue. It'll contain collagen, elastic fibers, but we're also going to have a lot of accessory organs such as blood vessels, sensory receptors, we see these in yellow here, nerve endings, and also some glands like a sweat gland here. So where are skin cells keratinized? Well, they're keratinized right within that epidermal layer. So as we move toward the top, though, they become dead keratinized cells, and that's when they flake off, and our skin is going to renew about every 30 days. Now we have to talk about skin cancer. Two of the three types that of the skin cancer that we can get arises from the epidermis. So you're going to see those two listed at the top here. So first we have our basal cell carcinoma. That's named because at the basal layer, the lowest layer within the epidermis, is where we're having mitosis occurring. And so we can get malformations there, mutations, and have it turn into cancer. It's the least malignant and the least deadly, but also the most common. Squamous cell carcinoma is going to be the second most common, and that is going to be within any of those stratified squamous epithelial layers within the skin. And lastly, we have melanoma, and that's the most dangerous, deadly type of skin cancer you can have. It's also known as malignant melanoma, and it is the least common. So what do you need to know about skin cancer? Well, we want to know how to prevent it. So you want to stay out of the sun between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Wear protective clothing, tight weave clothing, and treated sunglasses, wide-brimmed hats. And you want to use sunscreen with an SPF of at least 15. That's going to protect you from UVA and UVBs. And don't use any tanning beds, of course. I also just wanted to show you some more pictures from your textbook of what skin cancer looks like. So in A, we see that basal cell carcinoma, and in B, we see melanoma. Usually melanoma is going to be very darkly pigmented. Now let's talk about some accessory organs of the skin and why they might be important. Our accessory organs are going to include our nails, hair, and glands. Our nails are actually derived from our epidermis, and they're going to offer protective covering, whereas our hair follicles here, they are derived from the dermis, but the hair is growing from epidermal cells down in the bulb. We also have oil glands, which you're going to see, oh, sorry, not over there, that's a sweat gland. Let me see if they have a good depiction of, there it is, of an oil gland. This is also called a sebaceous gland, and it produces sebum, or an oil that is going to lubricate the hair and the skin so it'll retard bacterial growth, and it also keeps our hair nice and pliable. Our sweat glands here that I pointed to earlier are going to be derived from the dermis as well, and they help to regulate our body temperature by secreting sweat when we get too hot. Moving from tissue to organs and organ systems. So we have already discussed this in chapter 1, but an organ is going to be 2 or more tissue types working together for a particular function. So if we're looking at the stomach here, it's made up of smooth muscle tissue. We also have connective tissue in there, nerve tissue, we have blood in there, and columnar epithelium. An organ system is going to be a combination of organs that are working together to carry out a particular function. So here we have all of our organ systems of the human body. We've talked extensively about our integumentary system already. Cardiovascular system, this is going to include our blood, of course, our blood vessels and the heart, and it's going to assist us in transporting nutrients and waste products throughout our body, also helping us with providing temperature, pH, and fluid homeostasis. We also have our lymphatic and immune systems. The main thing to know here is that it's going to defend our body against diseases, and it does this through filtering lymph, which is going to be excess fluid within our body, and it can reabsorb and transport fats. The organs we have here are lymphatic vessels, and most of these lymphatic vessels will course along with our blood vessels. We also have lymph nodes that are most prominent within our neck, axilla, or armpit, and groin area, and also the spleen is another major lymphatic organ. We also have our digestive system here. Most of us know what this does. It's going to help us ingest, digest, and process food so we can absorb nutrients and eliminate any waste products that we have. It'll also help us with fluid homeostasis, and we have many organs here. Our oral cavity. So the oral cavity is an organ here, esophagus, which would lead into our stomach, our small intestines, and into our large intestines and out. But we also have some accessory organs like the liver, the pancreas, and also the salivary glands we would find near the oral cavity. Our respiratory system here is going to assist us in exchanging gases at the lungs and tissues, and will help us with pH balance within our body. And main organ here is going to be our lungs, although we can include the trachea and our nasal cavity and oral cavity because we can breathe in air from our mouth as well. Our urinary system will excrete metabolic waste for our body. It's going to help us with a fluid and pH balance. And we have 4 organs here. We have our kidneys, the ureters, bladder, and ureter. Urethra at the end there. So within our skeletal system, we are going to create a framework for the rest of our body. So it's really helping to support our body as well as protecting our internal organs like our reproductive organs, urinary organs, also the heart, the lungs, and so forth. Will also assist in movement along with the muscular system, and store minerals within the bones and produce blood cells within the marrow. Next we have our muscular system, and of course this, as we said, in our skeletal system is going to assist us in movement as well, but it's also going to really help us stay erect in holding up our posture. It's also going to produce heat when those muscles contract. You can relate to this when you're exercising. It's going to produce heat and warm up our body. So our organs here would be muscles. Our nervous system is a complex system that is going to help us in communication in the body. So we're receiving, processing, and storing sensory input, but we're also going to use our integration center, like our brain and spinal cord, in order to send out a motor output. So what that means is sensory input is information coming in, process it, and then motor output is information going out. And so by doing this, we're coordinating all of our organ systems using our nervous system. So the organs here would be our brain and spinal cord, but also all of these other peripheral nerves that you're seeing throughout the body here. Next, we have the endocrine system, and the main thing I want you to think of when you hear endocrine is hormones, because this endocrine system, all the organs that is found within it are going to secrete hormones. It helps to coordinate all of the organ systems as well. The nervous system is more of a rapid communication system, whereas our endocrine system is a little bit slower paced because it takes time to release those hormones, have it flow through the blood to go to its target organ or destination. It'll help to regulate metabolism by doing this, and also our stress response. Just notice that our textbook spelled that wrong, so that should be an S, obviously. It's also going to be involved in our fluid and pH homeostasis. And some endocrine organs are going to be the testes in males, ovaries in females, adrenal glands, the pancreas, thymus, thyroid, and pineal gland. But also, I'm really surprised this isn't listed here, the master gland of the endocrine system is going to be the pituitary gland, which would be right here off of the brain. So more on that later. And then we have our reproductive system, and of course this is to produce and transport gametes, or our sex cells, so a sperm in a male and egg in a female. And this process will help us nurture and give birth to offspring in females. And the organs here would be the testes in a male, penis in male, ovaries, uterus, and vagina in the female. So the next things we want to conquer are what are our body cavities. So we have a few here. Let me see if I have this in order. I forgot how I made this. No, so we're going to talk about it here first. So we have two major cavities. We have a ventral cavity and we have a dorsal cavity. Let's start with the dorsal because it's a little bit shorter. So our dorsal cavity has two other subcavities, which would be a cranial cavity that contains our brain, and then our vertebral cavity, which would contain our spinal cord. Now for our ventral cavity, we can break this up really into three different parts, although usually we can combine these two. So let's start off at the top first. We have our thoracic cavity, and this of course will contain our heart, our lungs, and our esophagus. This can also be divided into the pericardial cavity and the pleural cavity, but we'll get more into that a little bit later. The one once we pass through the diaphragm, or not through, but pass below the diaphragm, we would call this the abdominal cavity. And this contains all the organs we'd find in the abdomen, like the stomach, the liver, spleen, pancreas, gallbladder, intestines, and so on. We also have the pelvic cavity here, and that's where we would find our reproductive organs and some of our urinary organs. Now I mentioned that you can combine these two. This is also known as the abdominal pelvic cavity. So what about our body membranes that are going to line these cavities? Well, we have two listed here. We have our mucous membranes, and these are going to line the digestive and respiratory and urinary and reproductive tracts. You see two pictured here. You have your combination here of respiratory and digestive lined in blue, and it just has mucosa that's going to be the inner lining, the lumen of these tubes. So anytime you have an opening in a tube, that's called a lumen. So all of this is lined by a mucous membrane. A serous membrane, these are going to line the lungs, the heart, and abdominal cavity. And there's really two separate linings for each of these compartments. So let me teach you those two linings first, and then we'll get into the compartments. So whenever we have something lining, that's a serous membrane, lining the wall of a structure, that is called parietal. The parietal serous membrane. Parietal itself means wall. Whereas if the serous membrane is right on the organ itself, then it's called a visceral serous membrane because viscera means organ. So let's start off with the specific names for the serous membranes for our lungs. You see them pictured here. This outer pink line is the is the parietal pleura. What that means is it's the serous membrane that lines the thoracic wall. The serous membrane that lines the thoracic wall of our lungs, surrounding our lungs, really. And then our visceral pleura, that's going to be the serous membrane, so this inner pink line that is adhered to the lung itself. Okay, so as you can imagine, between these two serous membranes, there is a space, and we see this best down in here between the two pink lines, and that will be known as the pleural cavity. And we have negative pressure in there to help us breathe, and we'll get into that in anatomy and physiology in the respiratory system. Okay, now for our heart, we call this the pericardium. So lining the wall surrounding the heart, that would be the parietal pericardium, whereas the serous membrane right on the heart itself would be called the visceral pericardium. And the last serous membrane we're going to learn is the peritoneum. And this will always refer to our abdominal cavity. So our parietal peritoneum, that's lining the abdominal wall, whereas the visceral peritoneum, that is lining the actual organs we find in the abdomen. So down here we see the visceral peritoneum covering the small intestines. Okay, what about other body membranes that line our cavities? So we also have synovial membranes, and if you've heard of that term synovial, usually you think of a joint because we have a synovial fluid within our joints that helps to lubricate and ease the movement of our joints. We also have this other term, meninges. This might sound familiar. Meningitis was kind of a problem a couple years ago. I mean, it still is, but majorly a couple years ago. So our meninges are connective tissue coverings that will cover our brain and spinal cord. And we have a couple different ones. We have dura mater, which is going to be really tough. It literally means tough mother. We have arachnoid mater, which is this lighter brown here, and arachnoid means spider. So this is a very web-like type of meninge. And lastly, we have the pia mater, which you see in this goldy yellow here, and that is adhered to the brain. You cannot take it off. So all of that helps to protect and support our brain and spinal cord. Now let's get back into what homeostasis is. Again, it's that equilibrium, maintaining a specific constant internal environment within our body. So anytime that is shifted off target, then our body uses the nervous system and endocrine system to bring that back to that homeostasis level. Changes from the normal tolerance limits results in illness or even death. So we definitely want to prevent that. So an example, we've already mentioned this in class, is if our body temperature changes, like let's say it's really cold, we have cold receptors within our skin that's going to detect that. We get a negative feedback and our body temperature is starting to go down. So then we send a message over to our control center, and that's going to bring our body temperature back up by causing our muscles to shiver, and then our body heat increases and we're back to our normal body temperature. All of our systems are important in maintaining homeostasis. I'm not going to go through each individual one of these systems, but you can kind of read it on your own and understand how it's going to bring back anything that goes off balance. So we've been talking about negative feedback. Here it is, its main definition. It's the output of the system resolving or correcting the original stimulus. So here it is again, body temperature drops. Oh, I went the wrong way. Body temperature rises. Our body is going to start to sweat. That sweat evaporates off our skin and causes our body temperature to drop. Whereas positive feedback, every time you think of positive feedback, always think amplification. Amplification. It's always going to increase the change in the same direction as the original stimulus. So we can think of this as like a bank account. The account balance is going to grow, more interest is earned, and then that causes the account balance to grow more. So areas in our body where this positive feedback would happen is in childbirth. When a woman gets contractions, they start out slow, spaced apart, but then those contractions are going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And as the baby is starting to butt its head against the cervix, it's going to cause the uterus to want to contract even more. So we're amplifying that. Another situation is when we get blood clots. We're going to keep sending that signal to get platelets, to cause more fibrin to attach all the red blood cells to close up that wound. What's my example here? No specific example here, but this is how our homeostasis level is teetered off balance. We get a stimulus, goes over to our sensors, sends that to our control center, which would be our brain or spinal cord. That causes an effector to give us a different response, and that will bring us back to our homeostasis level. And here's an example of that feedback loop. Let's see, what do we have here? I forgot what I posted here. Oh, again, this is your body temperature being off. Sorry, my contacts are going dry. I could barely see this picture. So our body temperature goes up. We get a stimulus, goes over to our brain, tells it that we need to drop this body temperature. Our sweat glands are going to cause us to sweat, and then we bring that temperature down. And same thing is happening here when we get too cold. Stimulus is sent over to our brain, so this is all sensory input. And then our motor output would cause our blood vessels to constrict, sweat glands to be inactive, and shivering of our muscles in order to bring our body temperature back up and back to our homeostasis level. So here's that example of positive feedback. Again, I got ahead of myself, where we have the baby in the uterus, and so we're going to have that amplification. So we have a hormone that's secreted called oxytocin during childbirth, and as that the uterine contractions increase, we start secreting more and more oxytocin, so our uterine contractions get stronger and more frequent. It can be harmful in certain situations to have a positive feedback loop when a fever becomes too high, for example, and continues to rise. So that's it for Chapter 4. Let me know if you have any questions at all, and I will see you next week for your exam. Don't forget to complete your labs if you haven't already. That was 5.1 and 6.1 to turn in on Monday to study for your exam and complete all of your Learn Smart assignments.